Hey guys, welcome to the show. Today I have a very special guest, Lewis Miller. He recently came to faith in Christ in New York City, and he had lived as a gay man for over 30, I think 30 years. And I'm excited to hear his story. It's fascinating, and it's just a testament to God's incredible power. Also, if you want to help the show, you help support the show, you can become a patron and join Patreon. There's a link below. It's very simple. Just click on the link. And for as little as $5 a month, you can help us out. We really appreciate it. But in the meantime, welcome, Lewis Miller.
Thank you, Becket. Good to be here.
So glad to have you on. I think, I don't know, it was like a couple months ago, or can't remember, but someone sent me the the clip of you speaking at your church in New York, and I was like, I've got to get this guy on my show. And I think I reached out to you like through like a DM, but you probably didn't see it. But I'm glad we're connected
I
now.
don't read any of those comments, or so no,
Oh,
totally
good.
good.
Yeah. So Drew Hammer, thankfully, Drew Hammer intervened and she connected us,
Yeah.
which is awesome. So tell us, okay, so you have an amazing story. You were born into a strong Christian family.
Yep.
And you got baptized when you were 14. So what was that like? At what point in your life, how young were you when you started to realize you were attracted to the same sex?
Probably around 12 or 13, maybe a little bit earlier. I was baptized when I was 14. I grew up like you said, my family is very strong Christian. It's a very, very conservative sect of brethren that I grew up in. So it was like no television, no radio. Very, if people saw them just on the street, they often mistaken them for Mennonite or Amish. So it was that kind of like caliber of plain people is what they called themselves. So yeah, so it was a very different. It was a very different upbringing. Let's put it that way.
And what part of the country was this in?
This was in Central California, so Modesto.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then, so when you were started to experience same-sex attraction, how did you, what was that like when you were in this Christian family? How did you deal with that?
Well, I didn't even know how to deal with it because it was nothing that was talked about. I mean, maybe you would see something in the newspaper that would be happening in San Francisco that was a couple of hours north. But it's like I didn't know anybody. It certainly wasn't a topic that was discussed in the church. So it was so foreign to me that I really didn't know where to place it. And so in a strange way, I wasn't afraid of it, I guess. I don't even,
Mhm.
it doesn't really make sense. I knew that I was different from an early age. And that obviously, as I developed into my teenage years, that just sort of intensified. Nothing obviously happened on it, but it was a lonely place. Actually, now that I'm starting to think about it, it was weird because my friends were all starting to date, and I would date girls and stuff, but you go through the motions, and
Right.
I just I'm like, I don't know. For me, it was about how quickly can I get out of here and get off to college.
And so, but how did that square with your family's faith and I guess your faith as a kid? I mean, were you thinking, I don't want this, and I'm gonna just kind of deny this part of myself, or did you just think? Were you thinking like, I can't, as you said, I can't wait to get out and kind of engage and pursue this life?
No, I didn't think about pursuing it. And here's what's odd, and I don't, and I want to say this carefully because I know that I'm going to have a lot of people in my background, and my parents are still part of it that are going to listen to this, and I don't want to offend anybody, but this is really because I've thought about this a lot in the last couple of years. When you are raised in a church, that there is so much emphasis placed on a lot of things that are technically not biblical,
Mm,
whether or not you can go to school dances, or how big the print is on the homemade dresses that the women wore, or whether girls were wearing mascara, or no, it got down to that kind of minutia.
Wow. Okay.
They're all of the kind of, I remember growing up and the kind of bickering and the things that caused tension were silly little things like that weren't necessarily biblical. Um, and so
It sounds like Footloose, the movie.
yeah, it was just, and then homosexuality was like so not even up, like on the table as a part of the conversation, that when I left, I didn't really know where to put it. And I think there was part of me that threw the baby out with the bathwater, because I was trying to separate what was important and what wasn't. And since,
Mm,
I don't know, I haven't quite, I say that, but at the same time, there was a lot of internal struggle. Like I did feel like, well, wait a second. I know that intrinsically this is not what Jesus had his best, has in mind for my life. But at the same time, I'm like, well, there's so many other versions of Christianity out here. I've been in growing up in one that is kind of fighting over these little issues that are not even biblical. you know Maybe there's some elasticity somewhere. If
right.
kind of,
Right.
um and I remember I was 18. I was getting ready to move to college in Seattle, which was the closest big city from where my parents lived, because we lived in Eastern Washington State, and that's where they live now. And so I was going to Seattle for college, and I had been communicating with somebody and had found one of these sort of conversion ex-gay therapy
Hmm.
situations. And
Yeah.
I came out to my mother and I told her, and I said, you've got to help me strategize, basically, like how, like, because this thing starts like a month before school starts. So how are we going to convince dad without telling him this dirty little secret that I need to go early so I can be a part of this program? And I'm not sure how we actually manipulated that conversation, but somehow I managed to go a couple weeks or like a month early, move to college, settle in, so I could start this, kind of conversion therapy. And I remember going to that. It was in the basement of a church, and I had never at that point, I was 18 years old. I realized I had never seen a gay person. I didn't know what I was gonna walk into. So it was
Wow.
the first time I'd actually laid eyes on somebody who was dealing with the same issue.
And what was your mother's reaction when you came out to her?
It wasn't great. I think she pretty much just like, I think she just like went cold, which I guess I understand, and I remember her saying just like, well, we can't tell your dad. I'm like, okay, well, I don't plan on it because that sounds so scary. And this is, and I knew this was something that I was not, you know, um, proud of, and I was ashamed of it. But just I remember growing up, sexuality in general was there was so much shame around it. I just remember like even going through adolescence, it was so awkward and it was so embarrassing. And so like anything that had to do with sex, it was just kind of mortified me. So like I couldn't even like bear to have any sort of conversation about it. So, especially this issue.
And so so what happened in that program where you were in? Did that help you at all? Did it
Uh,
obviously?
I no, I mean, I'm going to be perfectly frank, because what's the point of talking about it if I'm not? No, I went to that program. I think I went to two, maybe three, of the meetings, and
Mhm.
quickly dropped out. At that point, I was in Seattle. I'm like, no, no, um, this isn't for me. I'm here to have fun now. And
Yeah.
when I getting out of there, I was like a bat out of hell. I'm just like, boom. And I connected with a group of guys there who went to a vineyard church, and I was in there, they had a group house, and a couple of them were struggling with the same issue. And one was maybe 10 or 15 years older than me. So he was a little bit of a mentor. But honestly, Beckett, like, I had no desire to do anything. I just wanted to have fun. And ultimately, I got kicked out of that house because it was clear that my motives were not to turn away from the gay lifestyle.
And
Um,
so in college, did you identify as gay?
Yeah, I guess I did. It felt so free for the first time in my life, as growing up in a conservative background with, a family that was farmers, and the guys all did masculine things, and they were all great at sports and liked to fish and kill, deer. And I didn't like to do any of that. I was the weird one who was in the garden. And so it was such an awkward childhood that to be sort of out of it and realize that, oh wow, I don't have to do any of that anymore. I don't have to impress anybody. That was so liberating.
And so what was it like? So what happened after college? Did you move to New York right after college?
So then I lived in Seattle for about 7 years. And um, I, the first couple years I was 18, I would say from 18 to 20 or so. Well, no, I was there for 7 years, and then yeah, for the first couple of years, I lived in this house, and I sort of wrestled a little bit with my faith. There was a lot of wrestling with it because I felt like I was a Christian. I felt like I was supposed to be a Christian. I wanted to be a Christian, but I felt like it was the party that I wasn't invited to. Like,
Mhm.
there's this issue, and now there's really nothing I can do about that. And it is what it is. And I gave it a couple of, I thought worthy shots of, okay, let's clean up my act. Let's get right with God. And it lasted a couple of weeks at the most. And and then I just started jump from relationship to relationship over the period of 30 years.
Did you ever think
I moved
about?
to New York in 2000.
I don't know if this was a thing in that at that time, but did you ever think about going to a gay affirming church?
No, but okay. So not really. I mean, there was a Catholic church that we would all go to on occasion because it had an amazing like black choir, and everybody loved it because the music was so good, and it was gay affirming. But it was more just to go to the choir, and then it was something to do on Sunday morning. But no, gay affirming churches. That's what's weird is even then after moving to New York and throughout the decades, like I had no taste for gay affirming churches. Like the progressive side of Christianity, I knew that was bogus. Like there was nothing about it. Um, it's like I couldn't square that. I couldn't. What's the term? I couldn't square that peg or square that.
Yeah, square that whole. I mean, I was the same way. I knew when I was living that life before I became a Christian. I knew instinctively that any sort of progressive Christianity, I knew was false.
Yeah, yeah,
I just was like, if I'm ever going to become a Christian, it's not going to be that kind of Christian. It's going to
huh,
be a real Christian.
right.
So yeah, instinctively, I mean, praise God, I don't know, he kind of protected me in that. So then you moved to New York,
Mhm.
and what was that like? I mean, that must have been, it's a playground in New York. So
Yeah, it's funny because I moved to New York, and but honestly, it for me that's I was 25 years old, and my playground days kind of ended. Like I moved to New York and I hit the asphalt. It was all about work. Like it was not like New York was not a party scene for me. Like I was never a huge partier. Like I've never been to a circuit party once in my like that kind of stuff. Like I was a pretty conservative gay. Like I didn't like the parades. I thought they were gross. I thought they were
me too.
shameful. It's like so. I was a little bit more aloof and probably a snotty gay, if and so when I came to New York, it really was about working, and I very shortly started my business. So my going out was extremely limited in New York, which is kind of funny, but it didn't stop me from like when I say going out, it wasn't like I was a hardcore partier. Of course, you would go out on occasion. It's like, I quickly, upon moving here within 6 or 8 months, fell into a relationship that lasted almost 9 years.
Wow.
So yeah.
And okay, so and then were you in kind of were you in serial relationships? Have were you
I
pretty
was.
much
So
in
in
relationships?
Seattle, I was in a couple. Then I moved to New York, and then I was in this relationship for about 9 years. And that when that went south, that was a really strange, awkward situation. The guy basically went crazy, and it was about a 2 year period of like extracting my life from his, and then I really went with almost a solid decade where um, I would date, I would have maybe relationships that would last a year or so, but never really a solid one. So it was at that point I was growing the business. I was um, fully invested in my work, in my career, and it was more about just like dating as having a good time, but no serious relationship up until maybe 7 or 8 years ago.
And you mentioned that, basically career and beauty were your kind of idols, your gods in
Totally.
life.
Yeah, yeah. So it was really like, if I can't, um, yeah, like I have I have an event design business, so I do a lot of weddings, little parties, decor for events and and weddings and stuff, and you know, um, I didn't, like I said, I didn't go out a lot, and I wasn't really part of a scene. New York's a big town. There's a lot of different scenes you can be a part of. So I would dabble in a little bit of this, a little bit of that, but it really was for me about kind of like, well, if I can't, if I can't have God, then let's just try to make my life as successful and beautiful and parallel to that as possible. At least it needs to look good.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I mean, I was pretty much the
I
same
could
way.
talk to my family about was business, so it was good that kept up.
Yeah, and then at a certain, I mean, at a certain point in your life, you became, and this happened to me too, where it was kind of like after college, I was sort of an agnostic, and then ultimately, I really just became an atheist. I mean,
Yeah,
I was like, there's no way God exists, and the Bible is just a myth like any other old myth. So, what you became an atheist, and then you felt free to marry a man.
I did, but it took me 25 years to get to that point. I really did wrestle with it. I think one of the first moments that I remember having was probably 3 or 4 years after I moved to New York, and I picked up a book, and I don't remember the name of it. It was something like Reclaiming Jesus or whatever, and it kind of was a liberal take on basically the point of it was like, well, why do the conservatives have to hijack Jesus? Like, why do they, and it gave me like the opposite side of the spectrum. And I'm like,
Right.
oh yeah, right. And it got some thoughts flowing, but again, it didn't seem quite right. It didn't really, and I'm like, well, God, I guess I'd be a Christian if I could. I was baptized, hopefully once saved, always saved. Let's just hope that we can have an under, it was a lot of like,
Yeah.
and, and then just slowly over the years, it started to turn to agnosticism, and I would just start to listen to more podcasts and different points of view. Again, it never really went progressive Christianity. I'm like, I'm either fully in or I'm fully out, sort of one or the other.
Yeah.
And then the agnosticism, like, okay, well, maybe it's happening, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. And then I just kind of over the years just kind of dabble in everything. A little bit of yoga, a little bit of transcendental meditation. There was some
Hmm.
Abraham, Hicks kind of like weird stuff going on there. That law of attraction thing.
Okay.
There was Stoicism. I loved Stoicism. I really got into that. I'm like, okay, this like aligns with Christianity. Like it's common sense. It's like, you have to think about death every day and make peace with it. And like, I can do this. And so I kind of really just jumped into Stoicism for a while. Um,
And what did that look like, kind of like on a daily basis, to be a Stoic?
it was reading Marcus Aurelius, who I did not know was a huge persecutor of Christians. I just, just thought, wow, this is, I love the wisdom and it's just the common sense. But what I really liked about it, it was just like, it didn't have all this kind of emotion. It just, and I felt like, wow, Christianity just is like, they're always crying about something. Like there's just so much, like, this is just common sense. It's like no nonsense. It's black and white. I love this. It's just cut and
Mhm.
dried. So it was really about, I mean, it's about like, well, this is how the world works. So you just kind of have to make it work for you. It's like a little bit stiff upper lip. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, this kind of works for me. I mean, does it give you peace? No, it just gives you it gives you a way of approaching problems. And I think that around that time, it kind of became there was this young guy started writing books on Stoicism, so it kind of became a thing. But it's a philosophy. It was a feel good. You
Yeah.
read these books, and it's like, okay, it makes you feel better about yourself, or then it's fun to talk to a cocktail parties. Like, I think about death every day, so I'm prepared. I would say that. I'm like, oh. I remember telling that to my mother, like, yeah, I think about death all the time. She's like,
By
okay.
the way, so what, and during this whole time in New York, I mean, what were your parents thinking about all of this?
I mean, I I really, when I moved to college, I really, it was, I can say this now. I didn't accept this for many years, but like, it was me running away. I fled, and
Mhm.
I kept everybody at a distance. Um, in typical fashion, I was the victim. And I just hoped that their brains could enlighten, they could open up, they could understand, and then we could all be a happy family again. And this is, this is so shameful, but I have to say it. Like, I remember telling my sister one time that I didn't think I was ever going to be free and really be able to be myself until after my parents died.
Mm.
Because I just always, I so much, while I couldn't admit it to myself, wanted their approval, and I knew that they were right and their beliefs were right. But as much as I wanted to try to shirk it and not have anything to do with it or not talk about it, I knew the truth. And it was sort of like, well, as long as they're in my life, I'm never really going to be free, is what I thought.
And
And
would you visit them? Would you visit them
I would visit them
once a year?
I would visit them, and they would come and visit me. And the relationship was like, there's just not a lot to talk about, because I'm the oldest of five brothers and sisters, or five of us total. There's two brothers and two sisters, and they all live near my parents. I'm 3,500 miles away. And then they started giving my parents grandkids, and they had a life, they have a life together. And so I was just kind of like the one that would call every, 4 to 6 weeks. And it would be sort of a strained conversation, because we didn't really have anything to talk about, because, I didn't want to tell them about, we'd talk about business. I talk about business with my dad. I talk about gardening with my mom. Once we had exhausted those subjects, there was nothing left to talk about. so, so it was always, and it's like, because our relationship was not consistent, it the conversations just felt so superficial and kind of sing-songy, and we never really, just wasn't a cadence of like people knowing each other, because we
Yeah,
didn't, like, and it was really me, like, let's just
keeping them at bay, kind of thing.
arms, and and I honestly didn't know. I didn't think I would ever be able to change it. I just had to have this. I just had this kind of acceptance that, well, this is how it's going to be. This is, they don't approve of my lifestyle. their brains aren't going to progress any further past this. I would remember telling my friend Elizabeth, I'm like, they're amazing people and they're smart, but they just have this religion. And the minute they come to this brick wall, it's like I think like all rational thought just stops, like, and it's like, and that wasn't that long ago that I said that. So
Wow.
yeah.
So in 2020, were you engaged to be married to a man?
So Christmas Day of 2019, I asked him, the guy I was dating for about 6 years, I asked him to marry me. And at that point, I had fully realized that I was an atheist. I'm like, okay, this is it. It's that, there's nothing out there. This is ridiculous. And and the funny thing is I had never, again, like I was probably the most conservative gay man anybody's ever met, because I was not like crazy about gay marriage. I just didn't, I never liked the term marriage. I'm like, well, I
Hmm.
don't even know why you have to call it marriage, because I knew what marriage was. Like, this isn't
Yeah,
marriage.
exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so I never, it never crossed my mind, and I never really contemplated getting married, because when I came out, gay guys didn't get married, and you just didn't. It was just like you were more friends, you were more cool, and now they want to be like everybody else. I didn't really understand the philosophy behind it.
That's what my friend, my best friend and I, we were the same way. We were like, why do gays want to get married? Like,
Yeah,
we don't want to get married. That's the whole point of being gay, is
yeah.
not to be
Our lives are
conformed to
great. It's like,
conform to that whole, like, heteronormative whatever.
no.
Um,
So marriage was like never something I really entertained, or I certainly didn't dream about it and like desire it. And then it was sort of like, well, okay. Then once I realized, or once I convinced myself that there was no God, that did free me up. Like, okay, well, what's the big deal now? You can't say there's no God and then have a hang up about gay marriage. Like, that just doesn't work. Like, you got to get on
mhm.
board. Um, and so I asked him to marry me. I sent a letter to my family telling them this, and that went over like a lead balloon, of course. And and then it was really more about just planning a killer party. Like, I just jumped into like the wedding planning, and that was the beginning of 2020. So the wedding was supposed to happen in November of 2020, and 2019, is like when I proposed, and then for January, February, and like 3 days of March, it was like full on planning this amazing party, and then COVID hit, and
And
there's
so, okay, and then COVID hit. So what happened after COVID hit?
so what happened after COVID hit? Like, I'm probably one of the only people that are going to say thank God for COVID. I think it saved my soul. I do. I do, without a
It
doubt. COVID
did. It
saved my
did save
soul.
your soul.
It did
Yeah.
save my soul. Because COVID hit, it sucked. Business stopped. I had a really amazing year panned out, and I needed an amazing year to pay for this wedding I was throwing for us. And the business, it just stopped. Everything just, and before we knew it, there was nothing at all. I had a lot of free time on my hands. I remember at that point, I owned a house upstate New York in the Hudson Valley, and I was out in the garden, and I love to garden, and I was usually out there early in the morning in the spring, and I remember just thinking, like, being an atheist, like, this sucks because I don't have anybody to talk to. Because being in the garden, like, I would just, throughout the decades, I prayed. I did pray a lot. It'd be haphazard, but there would be times I prayed more. But in the garden, there was just kind of a conversation always happening.
Hmm.
And I'm like, well, there's nobody to pray to because I don't believe there's anybody up there. And then I just remember standing straight up. I'm like, wow, oh, yeah. So, and it was kind of that moment that I think started the process of reconsidering God again. Like, that was like kind of my rock bottom of my, like, that was the bottom of my atheist moment. And then COVID happened. And then I started to, I started to listen to a lot of podcasts because I had a lot of time, a lot of YouTube. And, politically, I had always considered myself, just as any fashionable gay man does. You're just, like the Obama years was everything was just a big party year. I was more conservative, so I was left of center. And I had all the, be like fiscally conservative, socially liberal, all that nonsense. I was never big on abortion. I couldn't really get on board with that. Uh,
Right.
that was one of the topics that just, but then COVID happened, and it wasn't so much that as it was the political unrest that started happening. And I just remember that the question that kept coming to my mind was, what are your principles? Because I always, like my friends and everybody, we always just assume that we're on the right side of history every way that we vote, every way that we, but I'm like, why is it so hard to actually define them? I can't actually come out because it's so wishy-washy, and it's that just, and it's like spiritual but not religious, and all this stuff that kind of people throw out but literally means less than nothing, so
Yeah, because there's no plumb line like with the Bible, with Christianity. There's a plumb line of
yeah,
truth,
yeah,
objective truth that you can measure and say, okay, this is right and this is wrong, and it's very clear.
yeah.
But when you're not a believer and you
Oh,
don't
it's
know
just like,
God,
oh, I'm a good person. You're a good person.
yeah, it's
Spiritual.
like
We do what's right. And it's just like, it's just very nebulous. It doesn't really mean anything. You all feel good about yourself, and then, and keep living for yourself, because that's all we did. It was
yeah,
just like,
and going to brunch a lot. Brunch was our church. It was
yeah,
church for
no,
us.
I remember in one of your podcasts, like you were talking about gay church, and like for us, it was going to Barney's and having pizza, having lunch at Fred's on the top floor of Barney's. And like, yeah, it was like every Sunday. Maybe you'd actually venture out and go to Soho, but whatever. Yeah, and then you'd have a bottomless brunch, and it's just it just got so banal, after a
Yeah.
while. But I had to, I had to start listening to these. I started listening to these podcasts, and I, of course, had never listened to a conservative voice in my life. Just the sound of Fox News would make my blood boil. I was an avid New York Times reader, like everybody else. Wall Street Journal if I was feeling really conservative, and then the George Floyd stuff happened, and somebody gave me the book White Fragility. I said, I need you to read
Oh
this.
dear.
And I'm like, you're right, I need to read this. I read it, I was all on board with it. And it was like 2 weeks later, I'm flipping through YouTube. And this was the first conservative experience I had. There was Ben Shapiro saying why White Fragility was the worst book he's ever read. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's clickbait. Let's listen to it. And then I'm just like listening. I'm like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Oh my God, you're right. You're right. This is, and that was it. It's like that opened up Pandora's box. And suddenly I started listening to conservative voices. And it was like, oh, my dad isn't a complete idiot. Like there is actually, a lot of sound thinking behind some of these, and it really sort of like once the blinds snap up and you start to see things, you can't unsee them.
Yeah.
And and so then I just had to start going through the issues, and just like, okay, so let's be honest, like where do you stand on these things? Like, where do you stand on abortion? I'm like, well, I'm pro-life. And it was, okay, so that puts me on the right. Where do you stand on big government? Well, I'm a business owner. I think big government's nonsense. So I just like, I'm like, wait, you can't consider yourself left of center anymore. Like, I don't even know that you can consider yourself right of center anymore. Like, so, but of course I didn't bring up the LGBT thing. That's not the question. I didn't ask myself that, like, because that was, there's nothing I can do about that. That was off the table. But it just did. It just made me rethink a lot of my thoughts. And about that same time, I started listening, and I don't know why, I started listening to an audiobook on that Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis.
Amazing. This is my
Amazing.
story. You're telling my story.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's like I listened to this book and I listened to half of it, and my brain was just like blown. I'm like, wait a second, why when I was a Christian 30 years ago, like why wasn't anything explained to me this way? This makes such sense. And I would just tell people, like all my friends, non-believers, like I certainly wasn't going to become like some weirdo Christian or anything, but I'm like, this is just so cool. And it's like, but I couldn't ever actually listen to the whole thing. And as much as I wanted to go back and re-listen to it, I couldn't do that either because I knew that if I kept listening, the more I listened to it or the more I knew, the more I would be convicted or responsible for. And I was just like,
Mm.
this is great. Let's enjoy it, package it up. He's an amazing brain, and move on. But you can't go past that because then I'm going to have to make some changes.
Well, of course, I don't know if you know this part of my story, but I read Mere Christianity I guess in the late '90s
Mm.
in LA, up in Benedict Canyon where I used to live, and I when it got to the part in the book, he kind of mentions homosexual. I can't remember exactly, but he mentions homosexuality in a negative sense,
Yeah, I
and
remember.
I just took the book and I threw it across the room and it landed in the trash can. So that was my experience with Mere Christianity. I was just like furious. I was like, "Oh my gosh, get that out of here!"
Well, see, the
But
thing is, when I listened to the first half, I didn't get to the paragraph on sexuality.
right,
So
yeah.
yeah, so I was safe. But then I listened to it later. I'm like, yeah, okay, you're right.
And so, what happened after that? I mean, what? How did you end up going to or deciding to go to church, or did someone invite you to church? Like, how did that happen?
No, so then COVID happened, the wedding was called off. I felt like an island of one now living in Manhattan. I'm like, okay, I used to think you guys were amazing, free thinking people, but now you're not. This is, and I'm walking down the streets listening to like Megan Kelly or whatever on a podcast, and just like growling at everybody that is and just like getting just like so angry. And I
Mm.
was like, well, I cannot stay in this town. I'm like, talking to my boyfriend. I was like, we got to get out of here. Like, we used to love New York, but like, and he had gotten more conservative too in his political slant over COVID and all of that. And I'm like, maybe we need to start thinking about moving to a red state. Like, we think Nashville's cool or Charleston, or I'm like, yeah, but I can't make a living there. So what do I do? I'm like, oh, I know. Well, it's Palm Beach. Let's open up an office in Palm Beach because all my clients are there. I'm like, this is perfect, low hanging fruit, easy peasy. So that was my brilliant idea to open up an office in Palm Beach, thinking, okay, this is going to be my 5-year plan of getting out of New York, getting out of this liberal cesspool, get down somewhere where it's more rational. And, you're coming with me kind of thing. I don't know what he worked in the fashion industry. I'm like, we'll figure out something for you. And Miami's not necessarily, New York, but, so, and then this change happened really fast. It happened, it happened so fast. I sold my house up in the Hudson Valley. I bought a house down in Florida. I opened up an office. All happened and moved people down there within like 6 months. And part of me was like, it was like, okay, so am I going to be able to develop a community here? Like there was always this like, I want to get back in touch with my spiritual roots. If I'm going to be down there, because it's going to be a seasonal thing, because I'll still keep my office in New York, and my business is more spring through fall here, and it's the winter months down there. But I'm down there, I can kind of tap into maybe a Christian community. These were just sort of like thoughts in my head, and I remember the first season, and so then we were because we're living together, and we were I was down there for the first winter and going back and forth every week or 10 days. And I remember him just asking me on the phone, he's like, when are we going to have this wedding? And in my mind, immediately, I'm like, it'll never happen. Like, I cannot go through with it. And I
Wow.
just like, and I kind of, I just like, I'm like, listen, we have so much commitment. We've got dogs. We have, two houses now of two businesses. Like nobody's going anywhere. Like this is, like I just totally, like, just don't
You're
be
like kicking the can down the road. You're like, "Oh, we'll worry about that later."
kicking the can down the road. But I'm just like, okay, I just at this point now don't know that I can make that kind of commitment. Like, let's just keep it, it's fine the way it is. And but then stuff started happening. Like I really started to be I guess the best way of putting it is, and actually you in your testimony, and which I'll come to that, but like what you said was so true. It's just sort of like, okay, Peggy Lee, is that all there is? This all there is? Is this all there is? At some point, it's like the travel, the restaurants, the cocktail parties. It's just like, ugh, none of it means. It's just doesn't. It's not exciting anymore. It's
Yeah.
just like it's just another thing to do. And I just remember thinking like, God, I spend a lot of money on myself just to keep myself entertained, between the alcohol and the gym and the restaurants and the clothes,
Shopping. Yeah.
trips, and it's just like this, but I know this is what you're supposed to do as a middle-aged gay man, like this is it, and just
Yeah.
trying to fight off aging because God forbid.
No, I always say, when you're at least in California, when you hit a certain age as a gay man, you're put out to pasture in Palm Springs.
you know,
So yeah, I don't. I think in New York,
no, it's the same thing, and
it
except
must
like,
be
might as well you get
Montauk or something. You go to Montauk after a certain age.
yeah, right. No, you just move to East Hampton, and you're just like, yeah. So and that was starting to get a little scary. And but what was really happening was that this God-shaped hole was really, I was spiritually, I was just starving, and I was starting to kind of anybody who was slightly Christian in my life, I would kind of have conversations with them. But again,
Mhm.
it was never in a million years. I'm like, there's no way I'm not changing. I'm not giving this up. I'm just like, let's, there's so much about it that I hungered for. So it was nice to have the conversations. But it just, at some point I was like, I got to the point where the last year, well, actually, no, it was June of 23. And it was 23. I was up here and he was in LA for work. And I was just like, man, I should just go to church. I want to go to church. And I didn't know even I didn't even know there were Christians in Manhattan, New York. I was like, there's a lot of beautiful churches, but they all, have rainbow flags on the
Yeah.
doors and everything. And I remember my parents had went to this church years before in the early 2000s when they had come a couple of times and they kept talking about it. And I'm like, I'd never go with him. I'm like, guys, go. We're going to meet. Like, I don't know why we can't like go to the Met or the Frick or do something sophisticated, but you're in New York and you want to go to church. Like, we'll meet up afterwards.
The Frick, which was just redone. I love that. I love the Frick, but yeah,
But it's like,
it's not church.
it's like you're in New York. You go to church anywhere. Come to do something that you can't do anywhere else. But no, they went to church. And I remembered this church. I'm like, okay, well, if mom and dad went there, there's a good chance that it's probably pretty solid. So
Mhm.
um, I remember I had never watched a service online. I Googled it. I went, I just like, okay, I just hopped on my bike and went over.
And what year was this?
This was what, 25, 24. This was 2023
Okay.
because I came to the Lord in 20. No, I'm sorry. This was 22.
Okay.
This was June of 22. It was Father's Day, June of 22. So I remember it was Father's Day because I actually sent my dad a picture of the screen like pre-service, and he was just so happy I was there. And I just said Happy Father's Day. And but it's June in New York, so it's everything's just like rainbows everywhere, and and, and it was so nice walking in this church, and it's called Times Square Church, and it's in a big, beautiful Broadway theater that they bought in the 80s. And so it's huge. And I walked in there, I'm like, wow, it's literally the streets of New York. It's very ethnically diverse. Like I was by a
Mhm.
minority, it's like me and the pastor were like the white guys. Um, and and I was just, but it literally was like the worship was so amazing. It was, and it was just so beautiful. And then the preacher came out, and it was just like he just nailed it. And I made my way down to I feel like I was a little bit of a bait and switch, but somehow I ended up at the altar, for the altar call kind of thing. And like, this is great. And then I went to brunch. And then I met my friend in the park. We had lunch. But I didn't go back for a year. I'm like, this is great, but what am I going to do? I can't go back. Maybe I can go back 2 or 3 times, but God forbid I start to know somebody, and then it's like, okay, there goes that. You know, um, they're going to ask about me, and
Yeah.
this is great, but it's not going to happen. But then the next year, I actually tried to get gayer. Like, I tried to throw myself more in the lifestyle, whatever that means. I was like, is that like a last ditch attempt? My boyfriend and I, we were in gay therapy together, which was ridiculous because he was giving us books to read on like why monogamy isn't natural, and I was just like,
Yeah.
garbage like this, and it wasn't working. I was miserable, and I was extremely uncomfortable, and like I'm like, something I got to do, make some changes here, because this is not working anymore. And then we were actually I was actually in this office and sitting at my computer, and we were we were in a Zoom therapy session, and some little issue came up. I'm like, oh, here we go, we're talking about this again. And it was like we hit a wall. It was just like, it was so obvious, like, this is it. Like, and I remember as we were talking, like opening up a new screen on my computer and typing in New York City apartments for rent available now. Like, this is and, and he came back from his office. We went back to our apartment, and we just sort of like, okay, yeah, it's clear this is the end of the road. And kind of like, okay, well, our lease is coming up, so I'm going to find a new place. I found a new place literally within like 3 days. And um, and I felt like over the past couple years, and I can take responsibility for this now because I would have never admitted it in a million years, but it was me. I was definitely, there was just something pulling me, and I knew, and I just felt like our lives were going like this. He wanted to continue having, very sociable person, wanted to have a great time, amazing, nice guy, and I was just the grump who didn't want to do any of it because I was miserable. I
Yeah.
didn't, just, it was pointless. Um, I literally was so antisocial at this point because I just like cannot even stomach how banal all this is, and carry out these same conversations, and just like nothing had any meaning.
Yeah.
And so I remember I moved into this new apartment, and there was that moment, and the door clicked behind me, and I think about this now, and it kind of gives me goosebumps because I was in the crosshairs. I had the devil on one shoulder, and the Holy Spirit on the other, and the voice was being like, are you sure you want to do this now? You haven't been single in a while. It's the beginning of summer. You've got your buyers, so you can have a great time. Pick this, if you want to do this church thing, pick it up in the fall or something. Wait until winter. Nobody goes to church in the summer. You go to the beach.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, no, that's not what this is about. And thank God, because I think about that now. I don't know if I'd be having this conversation had I, postponed this opportunity. Like, suddenly my life had just cleared up. I was no longer in a relationship, I
Mhm.
was free. And it was weird but I'm like, no, this is what I'm doing. And so I started going. I was almost a year to the date. Started going back to the church. And like I said, I'm like, okay, if I felt like, well, at that point, I hadn't really sort of like given it up yet. I'm just like, we're just still dipping my toes in the water. Let's go to church, see what happens. But the conviction was stronger and stronger, and ultimately it got to the point during worship one Sunday that it was sort of like, okay, you have got to let this go. You have got to you've got to lay this at the foot of the cross. That's just sort of like the thought that kept going through my head. And I just remember, when I think about that moment, there was two visuals, there's so much going on. There's the worship team and people. But like there were I remember two things. I just remember a cross up here on a hill, and I remember like my head was like a pressure gauge, with a needle. And I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, God, you want me to give this up, this being my sexuality. And I'm like, okay, 10%, 20%, okay, 60%, 70%, 80%. I'm like, 80, 90%. That's okay. That's pretty close. We can stop right there. And he's like, no. He's like, and then it was like, and it's just like 100%. I'm like, okay. I just remember like, here you go. Like I have no idea how this is going to work. If it's going to work, I know that I do not have the ability to white knuckle it, and I have no self control, and I want what I want. And I just like, and so literally, you're going to have to take this and deal with it because I know my abilities, and in this department, I have no strength. And that was the beginning. And it was just like, I mean, it was crazy. It was just sort of like, you know, nobody knew. None of my family knew. If I felt like an island of one, because I had more conservative inclinations in Manhattan. Well, now I'm in the summer, and I'm like the only gay in town who is no longer gay. Like I remember walking down the street thinking, like, if these people knew what was going on in my head, they'd stone me right here.
Right.
And but the Lord just started doing such I mean, he fast tracked major, like, and you know, to not get terribly graphic, there was a point where I'm like, if I, like, it was sort of like my libido, which was through the roof, just kind of went meow, to the
Yeah.
point that I'm like, let me go to the doctor, because if this is because I'm 49 years old, then that's cheating. And he's like, no, your testosterone levels are just fine. I'm like, okay, it is God. And it's like my eyes were so open to so many things, and then of course, like, I just start like, I'm just starving, I'm hungry, I'm listening to sermons, I'm like, I'm going to church, I'm just reading as much as I can. I'm At that point, somebody had sent me your testimony, the 15-minute clip on Eric Metaxas.
Oh, okay.
I remember I must have listened to that thing like 30 times. I'm like, wow, okay, this guy, he gets it. I feel like, because there were a lot of, I don't even know how to say this. I felt like our lives were parallel. We had we had great lives. We had good business. We had the access to the fashionable crowd. And we walked away from that. And so that was a lot of encouragement to me. And there were so many things that went on with your life that I could totally relate to. And I'm like, okay, so, then I was in the incubator. I didn't tell anybody. Nobody knew what was going on in my life. None of my non-believer friends, none of my family. But I was just soaking it all up. I was listening to, you know, 12 sermons a day, and people started to say, okay, listen to Tim Keller or listen to this one. It's like, okay, I couldn't get enough of it. And that at that point too, like when I had some of my major kind of breakthroughs, like, the Lord at that point really, there was a moment I'll never forget where I was thinking about my identity, because there was so much of like, well, if I'm not a gay man, what am I? Like my whole career, my whole life, the way everybody else looks at me, the way I look at myself, it's all about this. Like, well, what is it? What is, and I just remember I had this, I just had this kind of like thought of like homosexuality was like a big cloak around me. And the minute you come out of the closet, you wrap yourself in this cloak and you hold yourself tight. You expect everybody to bow down to you, basically, because you are so brave, and you are, you can, you hold court a little bit,
Yeah.
and this cloak was this cloak in my mind that I was seeing was like heavily encrusted with big gaudy jewels. And it's sort of like each one of those represented a lie of the enemy that we just that we just believed about ourselves. And and it was sort of like I just had this moment like, well, I don't have to wear this cloak. It's heavy, it's ugly, it's suffocating, and I'm done with it. And I just like it went off. I'm like, oh my God, I'm free. Like, I don't know who I am, but I'm not a gay man anymore. Like, I don't even know what it means, but who cares, you know?
Love that.
and and that was really just like that was that was so freeing. And that was, then shortly there was a couple, maybe a week later, I just kind of had this, I was doing my morning devotionals and just had this really, like it was like the Lord is like, you're my child. Like you are a child of you're a child of the King. I'm like, okay, fine. That's who I am. Hallelujah. That's what I want to be. That's great.
Amazing.
That's my new identity. And then it was just like, and just then I would just look around the world. I'd look, walk the streets. You'd see the advertising. You'd see what, just like, whoa. My eyes were so opened up to this culture that we live in. I'm like, is nobody else seeing it? Well, of course not. I wasn't seeing it, 24 hours earlier. Like just
Yeah.
how just drenched in sex, how sex has become our God, sex and self. We all worship somebody, and in this culture, it's sex and self. And I so quickly realized how like, okay, you've got to rethink what you listen to, you've got to rethink what you watch. You can't like it's like how quickly that stuff is just like you're going to cauterize it immediately.
That
And
happened to me too. The day I got saved, I turned on the radio, or the next day or whatever it was, when I kind of pulled myself together. I mean, when I would hear things, I would turn on the radio and hear NPR or like just random songs like Sade, like just any pop song, and I would just like, and I would like immediately turn off the radio. I'm like, I can't hear that. I can't hear that. It's like because for so long, my whole life, that was my reality.
yeah,
And then now that we're children of God and in His kingdom, it's like, no, that's all lies. Like even kind of quote unquote innocent sort of love songs on the radio, those are lies. That's not real love
all
anyway.
lies. There's nothing seems innocent anymore, and it's just like,
Yeah.
and even just hearing, just the beats of some of these things takes you back to the days, and you're like, there, it's just, it's like,
Yes.
it's just, I'm not one to use the word triggering, but it is triggering, it's like, it does like, it's like, no, it's reminiscent of the days gone by. And I think there's a lot of energy and power and stuff and music and movies. And
Yeah.
I was I was watching. So of course I have to watch something. So I started watching all the Christian movies, of course, and then and when you kind of blow through those, you don't have much left. And I'm like, well, let me just see if I can watch a show on Netflix. And it was a detective show with Anthony Hopkins. I'm like, okay, well, how bad can that be? Well, of course, he's like a detective who can kind of has visions of things. And so he's interviewing this suspect in the jail room, and he gets a vision. This guy is accused of murdering his wife, and he gets a vision, and it's a nanosecond scene, but it's this guy going at it hard with another guy. That's the vision. And I'm like, I just remember slapping my laptop down because it felt like a light, that little vision of that activity just felt like I could just like felt like a lightning bolt going through me. Like, nope, I cannot, that's it. I gotta just
Yeah.
stop. Like it's everywhere, So
Yeah, I was the same way. I immediately after I got saved. This was back when cable was a thing. I canceled my cable subscription,
yeah.
and I remember the woman on the phone at AT&T or whatever. She was like, "Oh, well, why are you? Is there a reason you're canceling?" And I was like, "Oh." I was like, I just met Jesus and I don't need any of this stuff in my life. And she didn't know what to think about
You
that.
didn't know what to
But
think.
yeah,
Yeah. So, it's like,
And then what did your family what happened after that?
so I
What
still
did
hadn't
everyone
told
think? Your
anybody any.
friends?
Yeah, I hadn't told anybody anything yet. My sister came out to that summer in August, and I invited her out to like go to a Phil Wickham concert or something. So they're like, "Well, Lewis is going to a Phil Wickham concert." Like, okay, well, like, I'm like, whatever. It's So I didn't give any offer any explanation, but we talked. And I told her everything. I was just like, and she's like, Lewis, you got to tell mom and dad. They would be so. I'm like, Kelly, what if it doesn't stick? Like, I have to make sure this is real because I can't disappoint them again,
That's what my dad was the only one out of my 7 siblings and my mother. My
Mhm.
dad was the only person who didn't call me
Yeah,
after I got saved.
yeah,
Everyone knew. I told everyone in my family,
yeah,
and he never called me because he was afraid that it wouldn't stick.
yeah, yeah,
And it didn't. He didn't fully believe it until a year later when I prayed for him at his house in the kitchen of his house. I laid hands on him and prayed for him, and he he was stunned. I remember after I prayed, because I was so used to praying for people at that point. I was
mhm,
on the prayer ministry at my church,
mhm.
and he just turned to me after I prayed for him, and he's like, "Beck, you have the Holy Spirit." I'm like, "I know, Dad. I've been trying to tell you that."
I'm gonna tell you that.
Yeah.
It's real. Yeah, that's awesome. No, it's and so yeah, my family didn't know. Of course, I told my sister, I'm like, don't tell her. Of course, she went back and blabbed her big mouth and told them all, but they didn't say anything to me. And I was having this moment. I was running Sunday mornings. I like to run along the West Side Highway, along the Hudson River. And I was just kind of having conversations with God. I'm like, okay, God, when are you going to give me some Christian friends? God, I'm at this church, but it's a big church and it's hard to break through. And I'm just like, I don't know anybody. And he's like, basically, he's like, dude, you have an amazing team of family and prayer warriors. Like, there's not just a few, there's a lot. I come from a huge family, and it's all, and everybody I grew up with, they all commingle, they all know each other. So I'm like, oh, good point. Yeah, so maybe I should let him know. And so I wrote a quick email, and as I do, and then this one, I'm like, you'll actually like this email.
Yeah.
You'll actually like this startling, life changing news, for one. And I sent it to my mom and dad. I said, share with my brothers and sisters and everything. I said, boom, boom, boom. Here's what's going on. I'm just gonna, just break it down quick and easy. We'll talk about it. And it was just sort of like that was it. The rest of the summer, it was a full time job, just fending off the text messages, the phone calls. I'm like, if heaven celebrates, well, the West Coast was insane, and it was just like we never, people were just like, it was so amazing. It was suddenly I had a family, like instantly I had a family. It's not because and I didn't have one because of anything they had to do. It's like I had stopped running. It was literally the prodigal son had like returned, and I had a relationship with my parents, and I would joke with my dad. I remember one time I went to like 3 churches. I went to like Central Pres and Church of the City and Times Square Church. And I'm like, Dad, I went to 3 churches. I'm like, I'm dating churches like I used to date guys, like trying to, and he laughed. Like we would just be like, this is like, and we would just, it was so awesome to like suddenly be like, okay, I have a family and I love them very much. And we can talk about
That's
anything.
the same. Yeah, I mean, we have such crazy similar stories. I felt the same way as soon as I got saved. I was like, because I had always felt, pretty slightly, and it was me really, but I felt alienated from my family
Yeah. Yeah.
my whole adult life. And then when I got saved, I was like, oh my gosh, we're on the same page and we believe the same thing and we're brothers and sisters. Not only are we biological brothers and sisters, but we're spiritual brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah.
And I remember, I don't know, 5 years ago, we were having dinner. I was having dinner with all my siblings and their spouses, who are all believers,
Mhm.
all incredible, amazing Christians, and we were talking about politics came up and something, and we were chatting, and I was like, there was a pause in the conversation, and I said, "Do you guys remember when I was a gay Democrat?" And they were like, they died laughing. They're like, "Praise God, He saved you." Um, So yeah.
I know, no, it's just so awesome. It's sort of like, I mean, and honestly, it blows my mind because I never thought, I've never even dreamed any of this would happen. And like, but like just all the fringe benefits, and I don't even know if they're fringe, that are kind of major of having a family that I love so much that I can talk to, and just, and making up for lost time a little bit. I'm still here, they're there, but it's like we're together. And,
And what about your friends? What about your ex
so yeah, so
boyfriends?
then,
What did they think?
I at some point then I'm like, okay, I need to share this with a lot of my NBs, I call them, my non-believer friends. So again, in typical fashion, I'm like, okay, what am I going to do? I'm like, you know what? Write a letter. And I just remember sitting at my computer, and I'm like, I don't know how to get this started, but it was sort of like, so, and then it was over, and it was probably the best letter I've ever written. It was like, okay, somebody literally did this for me.
Yeah.
This was HS working overtime, and um and I really just kind of laid it out there. And I'm like, okay, boom, press send. Like, oh, let the resistance begin. And and it wasn't, I got such, some of them, there were people that actually worked for me that I've known for years. There was friends in LA, and it was just there was a lot of support. They're like, and it's funny because then I would get these comments like later, like, oh, this makes so much sense for you. This is not a surprise. I'm like, okay, all right. And then there'd be a lot of, well, this, we're, then I'm like, I'm just telling you, do you understand what I'm telling you? Like, I met Jesus. Like, I'm one of those weirdo Christians now. And I'm like, and I'm not acting out in the homosexual, like, it's sort of like, but then it was very much like, well, we're so glad you found your spirituality. And it's like, and then nobody wanted to talk about it. It was sort of like, okay, this
Yeah.
is great, but there was literally no like questions. Like one of my best friends, Elizabeth, she was really mad that I didn't tell her right away. And I'm like, well, first of all, this is a very personal thing. Like I have told you, she's like, you've been doing all this all summer. I didn't know. I'm like, well, it's kind of my own issue. Like, I've been working it out. That's also like, you're not going to have these conversations when you're a shaky new believer with non-believers.
Yeah.
You need to, and, and then there was some questions, and then it's just sort of like, oh, the conversation's just like stopped. Like nobody wants to go, kind of push it any further.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
what happened with my friends. I mean, it was kind of the idea was like, I'm happy you found your path, sort of
yeah, a
thing.
lot of that. Yes.
But then there was no desire to get to learn more about it. And wait, what's it like to know Jesus? Like,
Yeah.
what's that like? What's
Like,
it like to have a relationship with your creator? Like that was never kind of an interest in of my friends. It was kind of shocking to me because I just assumed. I was so naive when I got saved. I just assumed because these friends of mine. I mean, I had been friends with some of them since high school out here. I mean, they moved out here from
mhm,
Dallas, but these were. I mean, we had such deep friendships, and I just thought, oh, I'm going to tell them my story, and they're going to like come to Christ. Like
yeah,
there's, I mean,
yeah, yeah,
but it was very different. The response was very different than I had anticipated.
yeah. So and so then it's just there were some friends that uh, I there were some gay friends that I just really they kind of stopped being a part of my life, and I just I struggled a lot with the whole idea. I'm like, okay, it's one thing to say that you're a Christian, but then there's part B, and I've
Yeah,
got like okay, anybody's fine, you're a Christian, but like, but then the real doozy is I think homosexuality is wrong. I don't live that way anymore, and it's a sin, and I've chosen a different path. Like, okay, well that's now you're acting crazy.
that's when they think you've crossed over to the dark side.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So you know, but it's been such I mean, the relationship with friends, it's interesting, but it's like when they need prayer, they come to you. Like,
Hmm.
there's times when it's like, okay, they know, this is what it's about, and they're all in my prayers every single day. And it's been interesting because here in the office, I hired a guy that I became friends with also, that I met in 2 years ago, and he's now in my office. He's a Christian, and one of my friends from Times Square Church, she's in here a couple of days a week. So it's just like we now have Monday morning prayer meetings, and it's like, okay, there's clearly something going on, like, and it's so awesome. Like, it's like kind of mind blowing.
Wow.
Just uh,
That's amazing.
yeah. So
Well, Lewis, I am so happy for you. I mean, I just, it's such a huge thing, especially because, I mean, as, a quote unquote gay man,
yeah.
or someone in that world living that life, it really is such a huge stumbling block to coming to faith in Christ. And obviously God had different plans for you. He just was like, I want Lewis in my kingdom. I'm gonna grab him right now and pull him.
I
And
mean,
he
it's so crazy because I just think back over the years, and he has been so faithful. Like, he never let go. I mean, it didn't hurt to have praying parents for 30 years.
exactly,
They
that's what my
really never gave up. And but I look at I never really got what I thought I wanted in life. And now I look at it and I'm like, thank you, God, for not giving me everything I wanted, because those trappings, because I see people, and you see the same thing. It's like you see the people they've got it all. And it's just like, when you have it all, do you need Jesus? Like, where, and that's kind of my prayer. That's my prayer for a lot of my friends, is like, I want them to be blessed. I want them to be healthy, but God, just stir up that discontent
yeah.
that you put in my heart. Like, everything just kind of feels pointless. And then, just on the flip side of that, the reality of meeting Christ, when it's suddenly like, oh, politics, who cares? I'm not of this world anymore. I love New York. It's like, this is like, it just changes the way you look at everybody. You look at everything. It's like, okay, let's go to brunch. I don't have to extract some deeper meaning out of this because it's just brunch, you know? like, like,
You should get a hat with like,
has to
it's
have
just
like some
brunch.
amazing purpose. It's just to be enjoyed, because I know what my purpose is now, and it's like, praise God.
Well, congratulations on becoming royalty. You're an heir to God and a co-heir with Christ, so you are in the royal family
The best
of
place to be.
the universe. You're in the royal family. And thank you, Lewis, for sharing your story. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, and thank you for all you've done, because your podcast has helped so many. It's helped me so much, and it's just given so many people hope. And so, let's just keep doing it.
Keep doing it. Well, thank you.
Yeah, my
All
best.
right. God bless.